Look at me saying, I'm not bothered by outside noise. Okay, girl. Deceive yourself. I'll be forced to read romance. Okay, girl. God. It's so amazing how you can just sit there and deceive yourself. Like how easy self-deceit is. Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at everything that I read in November. I did consider leaving this wrap up and doing a joint one with December, but I have very lofty ambitions to read a lot of books this December, and so I thought it might be a little bit long-winded if I did, so I decided to talk about all the books that I read in November as well as everything that I'm hoping to read in December. So stay tuned. So the first book I want to talk about is The Last Buzzer by J.J. Mulder. Now, I actually read it when it first came out in October, but I forgot to talk about it when I was talking about my October reading wrap up, and I felt very ashamed. And so I'm only coming out of that shame now, but I did read it when it first came out. This story is the last in J.J. Mulder's CU Hockey series, which is very bittersweet because on the one hand it's ending on a really positive note, but on the other hand we don't like to say goodbye to a good thing, even though it's very respectable to end things at a good place. And so this book follows Desmond and Jack, who is also Mickey. I think you'll probably hear me refer to Jack as Mickey a lot because that's what his best friend Nate calls him. And I know him from that book. So this book follows Jack and Desmond. Desmond actually lives in Australia, but he's originally American. And so when he was a child, his family had moved over to Australia. So he spent part of his childhood there. And then they moved back to America, but he found that he really just loved Australia. So when he became old enough, he moved back to Australia with his family remaining in America. His parents are just really horrendous people. They are homophobic, they are abusive, they are just terrible people across the board. And so his move to Australia was partly because he loved Australia, but because he also wanted to get away from them. And what's farther than putting several oceans between you and your parents? Desmond's sister and brother-in-law are sadly involved in a car accident and pass away, and so he finds out that she has named him the guardian of her son Parker if anything ever happened to both she and her husband. And so he has to come back to America because he gets a call from his lawyer letting him know of this fact. And so he goes back and tries to cope with not only the grief of losing his only sibling, but also, I suppose, his parents contesting that decision. Even though it's something that was set in place, it's something that they had spoken to a lawyer about. His parents, being who they are, were trying everything to contest that decision because they wanted Parker to live with them. They thought it was a bad influence. They are very ashamed of him. They don't like the fact that he likes men. And so he's also struggling with adjusting to moving back to his country, taking on a guardian role, dealing with a grieving 9-year-old child that is obviously dealing with grief in the way that somebody in that situation would. He's also dealing with all the money involved in trying to fight off his parents because they're doing it legally, which means you have to pay lawyers and there are all these additional legal fees that don't need to be, but his parents are not understanding and they are selfish, and so they're putting him through all that just for their own selfish reasons. And so he meets Jack. Jack is, you'll know Jack from the previous book. He's actually Nate's best friend. And he's just such a sweetheart. He is such an anxious little bean, and he's not little, he's very tall. He's Nate's best friend and they were on the hockey team together, and he's a very anxious person. He's always worried that he's bothering people. I have a soft spot for all of J.J. Mulder's characters because she just has this way of creating the most lovable men ever. But I think Jack particularly because he's just such a lovely guy and you just want him to have love and acceptance finally. He comes from quite an abusive background himself, and so that has contributed a lot to his anxiety and his tendencies to draw it into himself and not want to inconvenience people. And the book explores the ways in which the childhood trauma inflicted on him show themselves now that he's an adult. And I think it was just nice to see him slowly integrate into Parker and Desmond's life. It happened very seamlessly, it happened very slowly, it happened in a way that was realistic for both their circumstances. I also really appreciated the asexual rep. Both Desmond and Jack are on the asexual spectrum, and I felt that it was very tastefully and respectfully done. It's also good to see a book that is representative of people on the asexual spectrum. There was also no spice. I think this is something that was public knowledge prior to the book coming out, so if you're one of those people who looks for a book with either low or no spice. This is the perfect book for that. But it was just full of so much intimacy and gentleness, and it was just lovely to see them create a little family. There's something quite gratifying about seeing people create the family of their dreams after they've been through so much. And it was not without struggle, because every character came with their own individual baggage, but they made it in the end. I personally love Nate's friendship with Jack. He was as loving and as consistent to Jack as he usually is. It was lovely to see cameos from Nate and Marcos. But also, I forgot to mention, Desmond actually takes on a job as assistant coach to Coach Mackenzie in the college. So he actually gets to meet Coach Mackenzie, and he also gets to meet Anthony from the previous series as well. So they were included in the book, and it was nice to see how their relationship had progressed. And it was just, Anthony and Nico's book is also really one of my favorites, so it was nice to see cameos from them and how Desmond built a relationship with them as well. It was also good to see the book take consent seriously, take power imbalances seriously. I love the way that was handled in the book, especially in terms of Jack being on the hockey team and having romantic interest in his assistant hockey coach. I love to see that the issues that one might worry about coming up were very well addressed, and JJ Mulder could have hidden from them but didn't, and it was nice to see that addressed. I think it's one of those books that really demonstrates what people are looking for when they talk about ethics, about certain power dynamics, and it was great to see that included in the book. It was such a good experience. I obviously flew through it like I do all of JJ Mulder's books, and it was such a good conclusion. I loved it so much. It's one of my favorites, and I don't say that lightly as somebody who generally struggles to have favorites of anything, because it had just so many beautiful moments interspersed between. The book very much felt like a comfortable hug, and I love that for Desmond and Jack. A beautiful romance could not have happened to more deserving people. Everyone should read it. If you haven't picked it up already, please do. But if this is the video in which you discover JJ Mulder, don't start there. Go all the way back to the first book in her other series and make your way down the line. I promise you that it is so much more gratifying if you read the books in order, because they're all standalones, but they have connections because they all know each other in some capacity. So it's nice to have that full context. I think it makes reading everything even better. So I absolutely loved it, and you would too. The ending of this year has been quite abysmal for me in terms of reading, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the first book that I successfully read in November, no surprises if you've actually been following me for a long time, is After Hours at Dooryard Books, which is Sebastian's latest release. And I was straight on it as soon as it came out, because if you know me, you know I don't play with Sebastian. She's one of my favorite authors. I think she actually might be my favorite author. Look at me having favorites. Somebody is good when the indecisive girl has a favorite. Anyway, her latest release follows Patrick and Nathaniel. It takes place in the 1960s in New York, I believe, which Sebastian is just famous for at this point, or should be famous for. And so Patrick works at a bookstore, and one day his landlady slash owner of the bookstore, Mrs. Kaplan, brings in this man called Nathaniel, and he doesn't really know anything about Nathaniel, but all he knows is that Nathaniel needs their help in terms of housing and a job and food. And this is something that Mrs. Kaplan does all the time. She did it to Patrick when he was in need. She just has this way of finding people who need help and just, helping them until they're back on their feet and then they go. So it's something that she does all the time, except this time it's Nathaniel. And Nathaniel is supposed to be somebody that Patrick eventually falls in love with. And so not very much is known about Nathaniel, but, they're getting, quite comfortable with each other. He's quite shifty and avoidant in the way that somebody who's probably been through something quite traumatic usually is. And then as they're getting to know each other, they're intercepted with the news that Patrick's brother has passed away in the war. And so his widow, who is Patrick's best friend, comes with their newborn and also moves into the flat that they live in above this bookstore. So their lives are very much centered around the bookstore because, they work there in the day, but then in the night they live above it. I think all three of them are kind of immediately bonded by grief and loss, although, Patrick's and Susan, who is his sister-in-law's, grief is very much more public, whereas Nathaniel is a bit more mysterious. You know, Nathaniel really helps with the baby. He immediately bonds with Eleanor, the little girl, and, you know, they become a found family, helping Susan through grief, you know, taking care of the baby, running the store together. And, you know, they have these neighbors that they also get along with. I would think that after I have read every single one of Cat Sebastian's book, you would think at this point that I would not be so shocked at how talented she is. But I think I will forever be in awe of the way that she writes, in the way that she is able to draw you in to a reality that you can't quite imagine for yourself. Because this is coming from me, who is like born in the 2000s, hasn't ever been to New York, is a woman, a black woman, whatever. Like, you know, Patrick and Nathaniel's reality is so far from anything that I know or anything that I can conceptualize. And yet, there is this ability that Cat Sebastian has to draw you in and make you feel like they are your family, like you know them. And it is such a unique thing. Her characters have a very lingering effect on me. I don't know about everybody else, but they tend to stay within me for a while. And I think that is no easy feat. She is probably the queen of found family, like the family that Patrick and Nathaniel create with their neighbors, with Susan and the baby, and also their friends, because this is a historical romance. I believe it was the 60s, but let me check, because girl, we don't want to be talking. Anyways, it's a historical romance, but somehow it feels quite modern. It doesn't feel quite like the way other historical romances feel to me. And I don't know why that is. I don't know whether it's something that she's purposely doing. She's able to walk a fine line between having things feel like it's from another time, another era, but also making it so that it's easy for somebody like me to understand and to follow and to imagine. Another thing about Cat Sebastian that I really love is that nobody writes New York like she does. Her books often feel like love letters to New York, and this happens with You Should Be So Lucky, We Could Be So Good, Danielle Cabot Puts Down Roots. There is just a way that she writes about New York that is just so magical. It makes you want to go there. It makes you fascinated. I don't know whether she lives in New York, whether she was born in New York. I don't know if she's from New York. New York feels like a great love of her life. Does that make any sense to you guys? There's nobody that writes New York quite like her, and it's something that has happened time and time again. So I would be so curious if she really loves New York, because it feels like she does, just based on the way that she writes about it. It was such a pleasure. It is a book about people that have probably been through such indescribable loss at so many points of their lives, and are dealing with their own trauma or PTSD or trying to heal. I think what I love most about her characters is that they are, most of the time, if not every time, they are fundamentally good people who have obviously made mistakes like we all have, but try their very best every day to do the right thing, to be kind, to fold other people into a loving embrace. And I think that's the thing that keeps me coming back to Cat Sebastian and seeking her writing out in the way that I do. You know, discovering Cat Sebastian's books, especially because of the way that I did, it was so accidental, and yet I cannot imagine my reading journey any other way. Everybody needs to read this book. I love a book that centers books in its story, and this does. It centers a book and a bookstore and people who like to read like I do, and music, and because Susan is a musician and Nathaniel also has a really good background in music, so they start to make music together. I love the way she writes about love, not just romantic love, but platonic love, familial love. I don't know if I've managed to convince you to read it, but please, I'm begging you, pick up this book. But even if you don't want to start with this book, I really, really think you should start with We Could Be So Good, because that is where I started, even though that's not her first book. And I think it's a really, really good place to start. But also, you could start with her first book. It doesn't have to be We Could Be So Good. But I loved it. It was just about love and loss, but with a big blanket of hope at the end of it, and I absolutely loved it. In terms of critique, I think that I would have liked a little more one-on-one time between Patrick and Nathaniel. It felt slow at certain parts. I think it started to drag for me a bit towards the end, but other than that, I really, really enjoyed it and no regrets. I absolutely loved it, and I probably will be reading it again very soon, because that is my relationship with Cat Sebastian books. I'm always rereading them, and at this point I'm embarrassed to just note how many times I reread her books, because people are going to think I have a problem, and I don't want you to think that, but like, I've obviously just admitted to it. So the next book that I read was Sweat by Jonah Yorke. And I think this is actually a debut novel. So this book follows Rowan and Tommy. They knew each other from childhood. I think Rowan bullied Tommy, and they didn't get to see each other until much later when they happen to be on the same soccer team, and then they run into each other. One thing leads to another, and then they discover that they have crushes on each other and proceed to have a more physical relationship that eventually blossoms to something more romantic and more heartfelt. And just in case you want to know, there is a lot of denial in this story on both their ends. They're both in denial about what they are for very different reasons and various reasons that you hope people wouldn't have to experience, but it is the reality of people in the LGBTQ plus community, where they don't really grow up in the most welcoming and accepting families and communities. History-wise, society has not been so kind to people in the LGBTQ plus community. So this is the reality of somebody who's been through that without the support and the love and the acceptance that they deserve. And so they embark on this journey of discovering themselves, discovering each other, but also I think Rowan takes on training Tommy, and so it really makes them spend a lot of time together. And then they're also navigating their own individual struggles. Rowan comes from a particularly just traumatic background. His background was absolutely heartbreaking to read about. The thing I love most about this book is that yes, the characters may be difficult to like at times, and you might question why it is that it's taking them so long to get to a place where it feels like they're stable. But then you read the book and you learn about their backgrounds, and you're like, actually, no, of course they would be going through these struggles given how they were raised, given the people they're surrounded by, given society. And people respond differently to different things. You cannot predict how you would respond. It's easy to sit from a privileged place and not be able to understand why they're doing the things that they are. But if you really think about it, how do you know that you wouldn't react worse? It's actually a really big book. It's over 400 pages, and I always say that a romance book doesn't need to be over 350 pages. I flew through it quite easily, and I think it's definitely the longest romance book I've ever read. But I read it in a day, which I thought was very impressive, especially because I've been in kind of a slump for a while. But I really, really enjoyed it. I loved the inclusion of their backgrounds, their families. It's a tough book to get through. It's quite heavy, especially because this is a college sports romance as well. And they don't tend to be so heavy. But this one was, especially because I think it's a solid debut, and I would love to read more from this author, because now I'm intrigued. I'm like, well, I was able to read your debut hefty book in a day, so I want to see what else you're doing next. So I'll be keeping an eye out for Jonah Yorke, because I really enjoyed it. In terms of complaints, it was very heavy on the smuts, which I don't typically mind, but I think it was slightly too much. I wish we had dedicated slightly more of that time to really exploring the characters and developing them from an emotional standpoint. That being said, again, it's a debut, so at the end of the day, I don't expect perfection from any author regardless, but particularly when it's somebody's debut, I think I give them even more leeway. And it's a book that I didn't think I would like for some reason. If you have read it, let me know what you think, because I think it was only released this year, so I'd be curious to know what people thought about it as well. The next book I read was, I actually reread Tommy Cabot Was Here by Sebastian, because I just wanted to, and I was seeking, like I've mentioned before, I've been really struggling with a bit of a reading slump, in the sense that I'm a little bit behind on my Goodreads reading challenge. I'm about 16 books behind, which is giving me anxiety, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. But I've also been struggling to concentrate recently, and so one of the things that I do to remedy a slump is to read something that I like and something that I'm familiar with and something that's quick. So I decided to reread Tommy Cabot Was Here by Sebastian. And this follows Tommy and Everett. So Tommy and Everett knew each other back in school, and they were best friends, and they used to mess around, and they had crushes on each other. The book takes place in 1959 Massachusetts, and they're now in their late 30s, so it would have been 20 years prior. So Massachusetts, in the 30s? And so at the time, there would have been no way for them to have any kind of meaningful relationship, given how society was. And so even though they did fall in love and they were so close, Tommy gets married and has a child and becomes a politician. I've talked about the Cabot books for a while, but I think the Cabots are what I would consider the fictional version of the Kennedys. So he comes from a family of brothers and they're a very political family. If you know anything about Kennedys, just apply to the Cabots as well. And so he gets married, he has a child, but then they meet again when Everett is working at the school that Tommy's son goes to, which is the school that they went to when they were boys. And then they run into each other, and it's been years since they spoke, because when Tommy got married, Everett was really heartbroken. It was a situation where it was kind of like unrequited love, in the sense that Everett fell in love with Tommy, and so did Tommy, but Tommy never realized, and he didn't take their relationship as seriously as he should have. Whereas when he got married, Everett was just really heartbroken, and he knew that he wouldn't be able to have a life unless he put distance between him and Tommy. So he got married, and shortly after, Everett enlisted in the military, and then after that he went to England and went to university, so they stopped speaking. And so they meet each other now in their late 30s when Tommy's divorced and Everett works at the school, and they talk about their feelings. They talked about the mistakes that they made, where they both went wrong, and then they reminisce about their time in school and how they've always really been in love with each other, and now they finally have time and they can acknowledge it, and they can have a semblance of a life. And it's such a beautiful book. I don't often read a lot of books about older men, I suppose, so it was nice to have that sort of maturity behind the story. But also, I loved all the physical descriptions about wrinkles and years having gone by and still having feelings for somebody that are just as strong, if not even stronger. And then now it's like mixed in with maturity and how you change. And it talks about the passage of time in a really beautiful way. And I loved Tommy's relationship with his ex-wife Pat as well. It was really, really sweet. Pat is who I want to be when I grow up. If Sebastian ever watches this and she's looking for book inspiration ideas, I would really, really appreciate a book about Patricia, Daniel's mom, because she's awesome in this book, but she's also awesome in Peter's book, and she's also awesome in Daniel's book. Every time I get a glimpse of her, I'm like, I want a book about Pat. She seems awesome. I wish it was longer, but I guess because it's a novella, I suppose it makes it even sweeter to have it be that short and that good. But it makes you want more. There's always space in my life for more Cat Sebastian, because you just can't get enough. She's amazing. That was my reading in November wrapped up. That's everything I read fully in November. Now, just to go into a tangent, because we love to do that, I've been in a bit of a reading slump. It's a weird thing, because usually when I'm in a slump, it's usually because I've read something I should have put down, and now I'm forced into a slump by my own actions. But now I'm really seeking motivation to read. But what I genuinely think has caused this slump is me reading so many romances, especially knowing in the back of my mind that I should really be going into other genres, because there are people who like romance and they exclusively read romance and it works. And I thought that I was that girl. But then I realized that I do need other stimuli in terms of reading other things. So I need to branch out into more genres. And I think it's because I've been reading so much romance that I am now in this slump and I don't know how to get myself out of it. And I am behind on my Goodreads challenge, which is making me very frustrated. Initially, I said I was going to read 75 books this year. I've since made it more realistic and put 52. But I'm still far off. And today is the 3rd of December. So if I'm going to meet this challenge, I need to read about 16 more books this year, which is daunting to say the least. And I don't know how to go about it. But also, the thing is that whenever I see people who, I suppose, feel pressure to ace their challenges or to read a certain number of books every year, I always have so much compassion towards them. And I'm always like, don't pressure yourself. It's a hobby. Life happens. But then it's almost like it's so weird to extend that compassion to myself. I also like to think that I can block out the noise. I can block out the pressure. I like to think that. And to some degree, I agree. But also, I'm not completely immune. And this slump has made me realize that I'm slightly externally pressured. And it's, I don't know, it's hard, I guess, when you're in this space to not feel the need to be achieving in terms of this sort of thing. Especially when it's something that you like and you love, like reading. You're like, it should be easy for me to hit my goal because I'm doing something that I like. It's not like I'm being forced. But still, I guess maybe I've created a prison for myself without knowing it, and I don't know how to get out. If you have any tips for me as to how I could get myself out of this mess, please help me. I really, really appreciate it. Also, I got a promo on Kindle Unlimited where I get to pay like what, 99 pence for the next 3 months. So I actually will be concentrating my efforts towards books that are on Kindle Unlimited. So if you have any books that you would like me to read, please try and not suggest romance, because like I said, I know that I'm not really in the mood for romance, or at least I need to branch out. So if you have any suggestions for me, please suggest things from other genres as well. So mystery, fantasy, even romantasy, to be honest, because at least that's still different from all the romance that I've been reading. So it will be a nice change. Am I the only one that gets really, really overwhelmed by options? It's like I get so excited when I get Kindle Unlimited that I can basically read an unlimited amount of books for one price. And then I look at the option and get immediately overwhelmed and can't make myself do anything, which is kind of frustrating. But I think also speaks to just my general state of mind at the moment. So if you have any tips for me, throw some recommendations my way. I'd really, really appreciate it. Give me your suggestions, give me all the things that you've enjoyed on Kindle Unlimited, and I'd be happy to read it. In terms of what I would like to read this month, is Quicksilver any good? It keeps on being suggested to me and I don't know. Do you suggest me reading Quicksilver? I also would like to read the books on my shelf, but I'm just lazy. I don't want to pick up a physical book, and that actually bothers me a little bit because I started off reading physical books, and the fact that I find it so difficult to read a physical book now is quite bad, I think. What else would I like to read? I wanted to read the Pumpkin Spice Cafe, but I've seen not so great reviews about it. People say it doesn't live up to their expectations of it, so I'm a bit daunted by that. Look at me saying, I'm not bothered by outside noise. Okay, girl. Deceive yourself. Oh, A Good Girl's Guide to Murder is probably what I'm gonna be venturing into very soon, because that I'm curious about. It's on Kindle Unlimited. I feel like it's my duty to read it now that it's available. I know I said romance, but gosh, there's so many romances that I actually should be reading. Like Logan Sage Adams has a couple of books that I haven't read. Earlier in the year, I read Our Own Light by Logan Sage Adams. I also read Out of the Storm. She has 2 books I haven't read. They're called Ourselves and Immortality and Resilience on Canvas. I would like to read those books, but her books are quite emotionally heavy at times, and so I'm a little bit scared about reading them, if only because I don't really think I'm in the right frame of mind to read them. But she is such a brilliant writer that I want to. So even though I said no romance technically, it's like I still want to read them. So I might look into reading Ourselves and Immortality and also Resilience on Canvas. Kennedy Ryan's Skyland series is on Kindle Unlimited. So again, even though I just said no romance, it's right here and it's looking at me, and I've heard so many good things about Kennedy Ryan and I want to support a black author, so it's right there, you know. I also want to read 7 Days in June. 7 Days in June by Tia Williams is also on Kindle Unlimited, so I'm just like, there are options, and there's a lot of romance in my face, even though that's not really what I want to read at the moment. Even Real by Kennedy Ryan, Hollywood Renaissance is on there as well. So many of her books are on oh my god. It might have to be a romance month, guys. It might have to be. If you guys don't give me recommendations, I'll be look at me trying to deceive I'll be forced to read romance. Okay, girl. God. It's so amazing how you can just sit there and deceive yourself. Like how easy self-deceit is. What else can I find that is not romance? I would consider Frida McFadden, but I also don't particularly feel inclined. Frida McFadden is one of those authors that for some reason is really popular and a lot of people like them, a lot of people read her books, but I'm kind of put off, even though there's no reason why I should be put off by her books because I don't actually technically know anything about it. And honestly, it's not even her fault because she didn't even do anything that I know of. But at the end of the day, I'm just like, I just don't really feel the need to read your books, which is weird. I don't know. Maybe when the hype around her dies down. I think she has a movie that just came out, so I think that's intensifying things. What else do I want to read? Colleen Hoover is definitely also in Frida McFadden's category, where I haven't actually read anything by her, but I also don't want to read a book by her, and I strongly suspect that I won't like her books, just based loosely around the things that I've heard, but also just I don't really feel inclined to read. Do people actually have authors that they don't feel like they want to read or don't feel any pull towards reading them despite how many people actually read? Is anybody like that, or do I just have issues I need to address? Let me know in the comments. What else do I want to read? Gosh, if I start ignoring these TBR lists and start reading things I've already read, I'll be so mad at myself because I don't want to do that. I actually want to really use this like subscription in a really good way rather than read things I've read. But it's just so, I'm a creature of habits, it's hard. I wonder if there's any fantasy that I could read as well. 12 Ways to Kill Your Family at Christmas. Wow. Lots of mystery on here. Maybe this should be my entry into mystery. If you guys have any suggestions, let me know. Hopefully when I do my December reading wrap up, we would have made some progress because it's not looking very progressive at the minute. If I'm going to get to my goal, I need to do some serious reading and I need to put my back into it, really. Yeah, it's just all very overwhelming, but hopefully I will find my way and I'll have some good news to report the next time I do one of these. Thank you so much for the view. Thank you so much for your comments. Thank you so much for your subscriptions. I'm so deeply appreciative of everybody who has taken time to watch my videos and leave me comments and be so kind and welcoming. Everything about my journey on YouTube thus far has been extremely positive, and I just could not be more grateful because the internet is a scary place and it's one of the things that kept me from, I suppose, creating the channel for such a long time. So it's been amazing. Let me know your recommendations. Like I said, I have a Kindle Unlimited subscription for the next few months, so I'm going to need your help navigating this huge catalog, especially because, again, I'm somebody who can be quite indecisive, especially when I'm presented with so many options at the same time, and I'm already struggling with trying to narrow down certain things. So just let me know if you would like me to read anything. Let me know your suggestions. Thank you so much, and I will see you when I see you next time. Bye bye.